Operation Anvil =RK equals Part 5. Droid Command Ship Nemesis. Third Wing Flagship. High orbit over Geonosis. Admiral Duoningo, the second in command of the Geonosis defense fleet, sneered at the holo display. As expected, that beast Grievous criffed up. The old Sullustan would never understand why his leaders let the Tinkan command fleets. Granted, the cyborg was good at killing Jedi and terrorizing the enemy, but in space, where it really mattered, the half-man, half-machine was found lacking. No matter. Grievous was out of the picture for the moment, no doubt busy running for his life while the enemy fleet was advancing towards his crippled flagship. All wings, converge at the closest staging point. All units do not engage the enemy before we've consolidated our forces at points Fel and Trinity. Ningo cut off the general comm channel and tuned his head towards one of the tactical droids acting as his staff. At least those weren't as useless as the run-of-the-mill machines employed by the Confederacy. The damn money punchers in charge simply refused to learn that the war was very hard to win with such inferior equipment, no matter the numbers. Give me a time estimate. How long before our forces can consolidate for an attack? The droid froze for a few seconds, apparently the strain of computing the information almost overwhelming it. Then it tilted its head and reported. Within 10 minutes we'll have about 60% of all available forces. 7 minutes later the rest of the fleet will be in position. The diminutive admiral glared at the droid. That's too long. We need to hit them before they are done with the rest of Grievous command. We won't get a better chance unless they criff up by the numbers. Ningo took a deep breath and glared at the holographic display. We need to slow them down. Launch all fighters and bombers, both on the planet and in the fleet. They will have the acceleration to hit the enemy in the next 5 to 7 minutes. Given the estimate of their new Guardian system, that won't be enough to cripple their fleet, but it might do enough damage to slow them down and disrupt their formation. Admiral Ningo glared at the tactical droid. What the criff are you waiting for? Do as ordered. Roger, Roger. =RK equals Republic Cruiser Chimera. First Assault Fleet Flagship. High orbit over Geonosis. Admiral Yularen calmly stared at the holographic display showing the disposition of his fleet. It was arrayed in a V formation, made up by 3 separate battle groups, each built around a single Corellian cruiser. Those 3 behemoths were the true heavy hitters of his temporary command. Each was a nearly kilometer-and-a-half long Titan, bristling with weapons and protected by vast armor belts and powerful shields. The Corellian cruisers were leading divisions of Venottas, each with their own escort of lighter ships. The admiral smiled. This was the greatest concentration of Republic military might in more than 1,000 years, and it was under his command. While General Vale was busy, using the Force to somehow boost the morale and coordination of his forces, it was up to Yularen to command the battle. Time? He asked. There was no need to elaborate. He's been working with his staff long enough that they were almost able to read his mind. 5.3 minutes until Rogue One is in position. We estimate 2 more minutes for Rogue 2 to reform and head our way. 3 more minutes until they are in effective range. Long enough. Rogue 1 and 2 were the designation of the 2 groups in which the remaining Separatists' forces were forming for counterattack. Unfortunately, someone with a brain was in command over there, so they declined to send in their ships piecemeal. Which was all right with the Admiral. That left him more than enough time to dispose of the enemy task force that Skywalker had decimated, before engaging the main enemy forces and system. Even better, the Separatists were granting him a golden opportunity to implement one of the General's underhanded plans for this battle. Take out the weapons of those battleships and execute Operation Overlord. Yularen highlighted the targets in question on the holo display. Personally, he thought that it was a long shot, but given the potential reward it was worth the risk. His orders went down the chain of command and new targeting priorities were sent to Invincible's battle group. That particular Corellian cruiser was leading the vanguard of the fleet and was already in range of the closest enemy units. A light cruiser squadron, carrying the Oni specialists and their commando escort, sped up, slowly moving forward. Now what a competent enemy would do to cruff up our day? The Admiral smiled and looked at his staff. Unless they have heavy reinforcements we don't know about, attacking us before their units are concentrate invites defeat in detail. Lieutenant Felix Solon, Yularen's aide thought aloud. True, true. Is there anyone else who wants to try? hyperspace jumps to form up and then attack us from point-blank range? Asked Captain Jaden Law, the liaison with the Corellian Defense Force. If they were using your ships and crews it would be possible. With munificence and those ponderous battleships of theirs? And cheap droids as crews? Well, let's hope they try it. Send massed bomber strikes with as much fighter cover as they can. It almost worked at Ryloth. Palion spoke from his station where he was commanding his ship and attached Venator division. It won't work. Not with the Guardian installed on every capital ship and all our fighters flying CESP. Even with the software glitches still unresolved. Unless you have tens of thousands expendable fighters to throw at the problem. The Admiral said quietly. Don't forget that we expect to be outnumbered in fighters alone by a factor of at least 10. As if Yularen's words were prophetic, the holographic display chose that moment to lit up with red dots. Countless of them. I owe the General 100 credits, Palion chuckled. His spook buddies did their job for once. Most of the Flagstaff looked at the Commodore and Admiral with confusion. In every written report after Ryloth, it was stated that the only reason why the Guardian worked as well as it did was because the enemy fighters came in ballistic, greatly diminishing the vectors on which they could evade and still be able to kamikaze the fleet. It was said that the system will have problems tracking and hitting wildly evasive targets and it could glitch if it had to track too many enemy contacts. Yularen explained. Well, that's... Felix was at loss for words. What we have installed on this fleet is orders of magnitude better than the prototypes we used at Ryloth. Palion cracked a small smile. That system is built with this exact scenario in mind. He pointed at the swarms of red dots that obscured Geonosis and the enemy fleet's staging points. By the spirits. One of the sensor operators muttered aloud. By all means, enlighten us, Lieutenant. The human woman gulped. Sir, that can't be right. Yularen's smile widened a bit. I can assure you, the sensors are in working order, Silver. Report. Palion added. Sorry, sirs. We are detecting in excess of 100,000 vultures. And their numbers keep rising. Just as planned. Execute Lacoon. Let's prepare a warm welcome for those birds. Yularen ordered. =RK equals. Republic Cruiser Chimera. First Assault Fleet Flagship. High orbit over Geonosis. I allowed myself a tiny smile. That many enemy small craft. If the CIS commander wasn't caught out of position, he could have used them as a hammer to shatter my fleet. He might have very well succeeded. Now whoever was in charge over there had to make some hard decisions. Either throw most of his fighters and bombers at us to buy time until he had consolidated, or let us dictate the tempo of the battle. Right now we had the initiative and left unchecked could further wreck the Confed's day. I didn't need to look at the holo display in front of me to know the relative dispositions of the fleets. I could feel them in the force. Left unchecked we could either make a pass over the planet, bombarding it, a possibility the enemy commander had to defend against, or pounce on one of their two main staging points, in which case we could inflict heavy casualties before the rest of the enemy forces caught up with us. Our third main option was to finish mopping up the enemy battle group which Anakin wrecked, hit the orbital defenses and slug it over Geonosis while simultaneously deploying ground forces. It was something often done in this war, sending in the ground pounders while the orbitals were still contested. However, that wasn't something I planned to do today, no matter what the official battle plans submitted to the Chancellor said. There was a reason why I stripped most of the various fleets currently not actively engaged in combat from most of their light warships and concentrated them as escorts for this operation. My soldiers were ready, trained and experienced in the fires of this war. Now it was time to see if my plan was up to the task. I submerged myself fully in the Force and became a nexus coordinating my fleet's actions. =RK equals. Light Cruiser Corellian Fury. Task Force Lacoon Flagship. First Assault Fleet. High orbit over Geonosis. Lacoon. I repeat Lacoon. The comm officer shouted, unable to contain her excitement. You heard the Admiral. Boys and girls. Give the word to the freighters. I want the cargo deployed yesterday. The escort carriers are to move forward and punch it. I want all birds in the air and in position before those swarms hit us. Commodore Jolie Solo ordered. The grizzled Corellian had enlisted after his ship was shot out from under him at Ryloth. Someone among the fleet brass had liked what he did during that battle, because he got the rank of Commodore and a vital part to play in criffing up the CIS bastards. Probably thanks to the general, who had recruited him for Ryloth in the first place. He owed that scoundrel one. Perhaps two. For a moment, Jolie thought about the kid he had been contacted about. An orphan, one Han Solo, a possible relative. If the offensive hadn't been kicked up earlier than planned, he would have been back home right now, meeting the lad. Well, that was the plan, just put on hold until some well-deserved kicking of separatists' asses. Graorg. Traorg confirmed and started growling at the comm officer. Jolie straightened and stared at the holo display. He felt energized. The growing enemy swarm was becoming less and less threatening by the minute. His carriers started launching fighters and the 20 cargo ships attached to his command began releasing their payloads. Each of those behemoths had their holds full with weapons platforms. They were small things, half the size of a snub fighter. However, the platforms packed a mean punch. Each had 4 small racks with concussion missiles attached as well as dual laser cannons. Great for anti-fighter work. The platforms were caught by the tractor beams of Solo's light ships and carriers, which then made their way to the outer layer of the fleet's formation. The ships moved as if they had practiced the maneuvers long enough to be instinctive. There were no mistakes, no units or even single craft lagging because they moved too early or late. It was a thing of beauty, which only an experienced spacer could really appreciate. Because only such a person would know how hard it was to pull off that kind of precise maneuvering on a fleet scale. The Corellian glared at the enemy forces on the display. Soon enough he would extract another pound of flesh from the criffing bastards that murdered his kin. Data links are online and clear. We are patched into the Guardian network. All birds are in the air and forming in their designated zones. Enemy fighters will be entering missile range in 60 seconds. 3 distinct waves of vultures were converging upon the Republic fleet from separate vectors. Their timing was impeccable. The separatists' small craft were going to strike their adversaries within moments of each other. Give me estimated numbers on those nuisances. Solo's voice was calm, not betraying what he was feeling, if anything. Estimates are 150,000 plus. The sensor officer reported. His voice was calm, too calm. Jolie frowned. For that matter, so was he. Even someone like him, who didn't particularly care if he lived or died as long as he avenged his family, should have felt at least some pang of dread at facing that many enemies with untested doctrine and new weaponry, barely out of the experimental stage. Yet there was no fear. Just Darasteel determination to see the mission through. He smiled. Perhaps we are all driven mad by the September's atrocities and don't care anymore as long as we drag them to the 9 hells with us. The Corellian thought. All fleet elements, weapons free. Yularan ordered. Rog, Traor order battle cry. The vulture swarms crossed an invisible line. The Republic fleet lit up, disappearing behind a wave after wave of concussion missiles. Operation Anvil. Part 6. =RK=. Republic Cruiser Negotiator 2. Battle Group Titan Flagship. 2 hours from Geonosis. Hyperspace. A single Venatorist on the forefront of a fleet made of assault ships and their light escorts. 31 acclimators and 24 assorted bulk freighters were carrying the army groups slotted to invade Geonosis. Those troops were a mixed bag. More than half of them were clones, born and bred for war. The rest were the cream of a dozen planetary defense forces and militias. As far-ranging as Corellian security officers and the newly formed Ryloth Light Infantry, to Wookiee warriors from Kashyyyk, Sarmasi Lancers, and Anxian Rangers. Turning that mess into a decent fighting force was left to 3 Jedi Masters. Kenobi, who was nominally in charge, Ki-Adi-Mundi, who was a new addition to the Geonosis Assault Force, and Shark T, who was recalled from her semi-permanent position as the Republic General responsible for training the clones on Kamino, among other duties. "What is that impossible man doing now?" the Togruta Jedi Master exclaimed. "Vale? Or Skywalker?" Obi-Wan asked. The Jedi Master was hunched in his chair, looking much older than his 30-odd years. "Master Kenobi, when was the last time you slept, or indeed take a rest?" Mundi asked. "Yesterday, I think." "Nope. It was before we departed," Ahsoka interjected. She was the 4th person in the small conference room. "That figures," Shark T muttered. "Are you trying to kill yourself, or is this a misguided attempt at penance?" "That headstrong idiot was my apprentice. Don't remind me. He's supposed to be my master. An example to follow." the young Togruta grumbled. Well, they both certainly leave an impression, Master Adimundi added. He glanced in the general direction of Geonosis. The planet will still be there when we arrive, right? Ahsoka asked. Even she could sense the storm in the Force brewing at their destination. Probably. Whether there will be much left of Vale once I got my hands on him remains to be seen. Ahsoka gave a pointed look at the older woman. Seriously, how long are you two going to dance around it? I have no idea what you are talking about. Shakti narrowed her eyes at the teenager. So you are only irritated that he left you with the ground pounders instead of being part of the fleet action. Because it's prudent not to risk our entire chain of command during the space battle. Tano's tone of voice made clear what she thought of her excuse. It's the logical course of action. Adimundi smirked. The way his lips twitched showed what he thought of that idea. After all, he was one of the very rare Jedi who were allowed to have families. So he wasn't even remotely as clueless as most of his fellows. Seriously? That's what you were talking about just before the battle? Obi-Wan shook his head in exasperation. We have multiple battle plans. Shakti shrugged. A lot of contingencies, too. Ahsoka added. Besides, affairs of the heart are a very much relevant topic considering what's been happening lately. Adimundi smiled at Kenobi. So Skywalker and Senator Amidala. It's obviously who our other troublesome general is fond of. He nodded at Shakti, who gave him a long-suffered look. I'm of course married. So does either of you have a secret affair too? He waved at Kenobi and Ahsoka. You are becoming insufferable in your old age. Obi-Wan groaned. Thanks to Skywalker's affair, he was going to become the Order's running joke. For the first time in his life, Kenobi couldn't wait for the fight to start. If only to get away from these jokers. I'm going to check on my troops. Just as the door was closing behind him, he heard something that sounded suspiciously like sniggering. =RK=, Republic First Assault Fleet. High orbit over Geonosis. Ship after ship connected into the data net. With each new addition, its capabilities expanded. Additional sensor clusters and targeting computers pouring their resources into a single purpose. The incoming enemy craft were catalogued, scanned and assigned targeting priority. Point defense turrets rotated, automatic routines checking how well they worked. Missile launches were uncovered, birds hot in their tubes. Autoloaders came to life, ready to reloads ready to be plugged in once the magazines ran dry. Then new contacts pinged the data net, thousands of them, all eager to join the fun. Newly deployed weapon platforms were sending their telemetry, adding their considerable firepower to the Guardian network. Seconds passed, then minutes. Firing solutions were refined, kill zones established as the fleet maneuvered to give clear firing lanes for the maximum number of PD emplacements. Then it happened. The reason Guardian existed. It started as a trickle. The leading edges of the enemy armada crossed within range. With each passing moment, more and more vultures were moving ever deeper inside the system's engagement envelope. Seconds passed, until a signal came. If it was able, the collective gestalt of all Guardian systems within the fleet would have smiled with anticipation. The order was given. Missiles by the thousands were flashed from their racks, the different fleet elements staggering their launches so no ordnance would be wasted on intercepting the same target multiple times. An outside observer would have lost sight of the Republic fleet, its units drowned by the light of countless iron engines. Most of the vultures, both fighter and bomber variants, broke in wild evasive maneuvers. Just as expected and planned for. Their tempo of approach slowed, the carefully arranged formations breaking before a single weapon struck any of their number. Salvo after salvo raced against the oncoming swarms, some of the droid fighters dancing in abrupt evasive maneuvers, others continued straight ahead, shooting their laser cannons all the way. No matter how small and nimble they were, missiles started to die due to the raw volume of fire, before their guiding systems kicked in a higher gear and started weaving into unpredictable spins and turns. The void of space was empty no more. A corona of exploding ordnance, blaster fire and torn, shredded vultures surrounded the Republic fleet. For a few minutes it stood still, the leading elements of the fighter swarms simply disintegrating, massacred by missiles. But that wouldn't last. There were simply too many small craft vying for Republic blood. Until in one moment, the halo of shrapnel and broken hull started shrinking, getting closer and closer to the fleet. No matter that the missile salvos were slamming in the swarms faster and faster as the distance got smaller. Another invisible line was crossed and emerald beams lanced from within the fleet, blasting scores of fighters apart. A volley, a second, then third, each larger, more potent than the last. Yet the vultures followed their programming, charging straight in the teeth of the Republic defenses, heedless of the losses. RK Republic Cruiser Chimera. First Assault Fleet Flagship. High orbit over Geonosis. They may actually break through. I didn't really expect that. Palion muttered. There are a lot of them. Some will break no matter how good our defensive fire is. Yularan interjected. He was feeling calm despite the horde of enemy contact descending upon his command. Release the fighters. Punch the platform's missiles. All ships are allowed to maneuver independently within the bounds of their units' formations. Let's make it harder for the bastards. Aye, sir. In the next few seconds, the sensor display became unreadable as the weapon platforms flushed their missiles too, and the CSP broke formation and charged into the fray. Outside was a bloodbath. Despite being savaged by the missile strikes, the vultures still outnumbered the Republic fighter contingent by a huge margin. Few seconds before the small craft met, the weapon platforms emptied their magazines, reaping a frightful harvest. The torrents followed suit, adding to the slaughter. It wasn't even remotely enough. The vultures didn't even try to engage the Republic fighters. They simply tore through their ranks, absorbing the casualties and taking out as many of the enemy as they could, before proceeding towards their targets. The first fighter engagement of the battle was over in seconds, and the vultures were on their way, leaving the surviving torrents in their wake. Only to run straight into a wall of fire as the PD guns spoke as one, turning entire sectors of the surrounding space in a wall of laser pulses. Anything that tried to pass through certain vectors, those usually leading at capital ships, simply ceased to exist. The tip of the Republic formation suffered the worst. It was weakened, with a score of light ships either crippled or with weakened shields after engaging the remains of Grievous' personal command. Their defenses were overwhelmed by kamikaze strikes, followed by bombers salvoing their proton torpedoes at point-blank range, before slamming themselves in their targets. A frigate went up, then another. A light cruiser staggered as a whole wing impacted upon its shields, before 20 torpedoes cracked it in two. For 2 full minutes it went on and on, a symphony of destruction, until the bulk of the Confederate vulture force was spent. Few hundred made it past the Republic lines. Get me the fleet-wide status. Yularan ordered calmly, as if he was simply asking for a cup of CF. If his staff was perturbed by the enemy assault, none of them showed it. 31 light ships are out of the net. Another 24 with light to moderate damage. We lost 5 escort carriers and half the freighters, but only a couple of Vinotas have light damage. Captain Law shook his head in amazement. What is our fighter strength? Squadron leaders are still trying to establish contact with their people. We threw so much ordnance around that the sensors won't be entirely reliable until we clear the immediate vicinity. A minute or two and we'll have clearer picture. Fair enough. Any estimate on that swarm? How many did we bag? 150,000. At least. The sensor operator grinned. Palion whistled. That was about 2/3 of the estimated enemy small craft in system. Good work, people. Now I want our formations tightened and ready for fleet engagement. Keep the WPs in the net. Their lasers will be useful in taking out the rest of the enemy fighter force. What's the status of Overlord? DCS Death Dealer. High orbit over Geonosis. Move. We don't have all day, people. Boss ordered and hurried to follow his own advice by sprinting down the corridor. So far his upgraded armor and shields were shrugging off everything the B-1s were able to throw at him and his men, allowing them to advance and crush all resistance without slowing down. Which was vital. Unless they wanted this whole exercise to be pointless, they had to secure both the ship's central computer core and the comm array before the fleet action began in earnest. So far it was going reasonably well. It appeared that most of the ship's crew were the flimsy B-1s, and those toys were now made woefully obsolete by the new gen of Republic gear. Which, of course, made Boss worry. When a plan was going that smoothly, it was either an ambush or, as the general was fond of saying, that being Murphy was ready to criff up your day. Apparently it was the second one. The microphones on his medium armor caught the painfully familiar sounds of rolling droidekas. A lot of them. Prep ion grenades. We are about to receive company. On it. Scorch almost bounced in his armor and retrieved the grenade launcher magnetically clasped to his back. Sev picked a grenade from his harness. Fixer simply gripped tighter the experimental laser that he was carrying around. Their motion detectors picked up the approaching machines and Boss made a sharp gesture. Grenades flew at the junction they were heading to, just in time to catch the destroyer droids as they rolled around the corner. Ion energy flashed in violent release, arching all over the machines and grounding itself in the hull. The leading elements of the destroyer platoon crashed, violet lighting running up and down their bodies. Most of their fellows were unable to stop in time, piling up in the junction. Fixer grinned and let loose with his combat laser, neatly slicing them in pieces before they could deploy. Scorch glanced at his friend. I want one of those too. You aren't laying a hand on my new best friend. Go find yourself another one. However, it won't be as good. Fixer gently patted his weapon. Boss shook his head. Sometimes his squad was creeping him out. We are almost at the computer core. About 400 meters that way. Sev ignored his buddies and pointed right. You heard him. Go. Boss ordered and sprinted down that way. RK equals. Droid Command Ship Nemesis. Third Wing Flagship. High orbit over Geonosis. Admiral Ningo just stared at the holotank. So much for trusting anything the intelligence types said. His bigger force multiplier was now gone for little to no gain. High still had about 70,000 vultures, the ones who were simply too far away from the combat theater to join in the first strike if it was to go on time. Even those should have been a decisive weapon to wield. In another battle, against a different fleet, that would have been true. The Republic Admiral, however, had brought enough screening units to make even such number of fighters far from battle-whining force by themselves. Now that he saw how fiendishly effective that Guardian system truly was, he had his doubts if sending all of the fighters together would have been enough. For a moment he considered ordering another small craft sortie but disregarded that plan. While the Republic defenses might be weakened, he doubted that it would be enough to do anything but further bloody their escorts. No. He would use his remaining small craft smarter. Let's see how good that system of theirs is in the middle of a general fleet action. At least the strike wasn't a complete waste. The enemy fleet had been marginally slowed down, buying him few more minutes to uncross his forces and coordinate a counterattack. Unfortunately, they didn't appear ready to throw themselves at the Golan 2 stations and weapons satellites surrounding Geonosis. Ningo thought about falling back to the defensive line so he could add their firepower to that of his fleet. However, doing so would leave one of his two forces vulnerable for a strike by the enemy. He still had a marginal edge in capital ships, giving him at least parity in firepower. Blood them, then fall back to the defensive line and hold them there. He muttered. The Admiral turned his head towards his so-called staff. Coordinate with all wings. He glanced at the holotank, which was showing his forces, their vectors and the estimated time they would be in position. We are executing a tactical jump in 2.5 minutes. Any units that aren't able to get in position before then are to make their way to the orbital defense grid. Roger, Roger. A Jedi falls. RK equals. Venator cruiser Coruscant's Pride. Low orbit over Geonosis. To be Anakin Skywalker at that moment was hell. His body was slowly burning from within, his head was swimming in a red haze, and the pain. To be the chosen one then and there was pure, undiluted agony. Every breath, every time the bridge shook as his cruiser was hit again and again, they all sent white-hot spikes of durust heel into his body. Yet, all that torture was a mere sideshow. Because for Anakin Skywalker the real hell was quite different. He felt it all. Each wound his men suffered. Every injury and death sent a backslash through the Force, slapping him in the face with iron fist. Men he had grown closer with than the Jedi who raised him. Anakin was killing them. He betrayed them all, and while regretting every moment of it, he felt no remorse. Because no matter how much he cared for his brothers within the 501st Legion, they weren't as important as Padme. He made his choice and it was time to own up to it. Skywalker smiled tiredly. The Force was raging, a storm ready to sweep everything in its way. Vale was here with the rest of the fleet. So Padme might just be saved. If he paved the way, then he would be either dead or there would be a hell to pay. Not that it mattered by that point. Skywalker had burned his bridges. The only thing left was to see this through. So he gritted his teeth and through the Force seized control over one of his remaining 3 Venotas. The cruiser shuddered, its thrusters firing and altering his path. The closest Golan 2 station, which had been pouring its vast firepower at Skywalker's battle group, redoubled its efforts, focusing its fire on the approaching Venator. The Venator's shields collapsed. Weapon emplacements blew away, its armor peeled off. The Golan gave it all it was worth. It was all for naught. Even as a burning, half-dead wreck, the Kuat's shield was more than enough. It slammed through the weakened shields of the battle station, its armored nose piercing it almost death center. The cruiser's engines continued to burn as more and more of its body were fed into the station, consuming both in series of titanic explosions. Seconds later one of their reactors was shattered and both ship and station ceased to exist in one massive explosion that lit up the whole hemisphere of the world below. Skywalker's smile faded. He coughed a glob of blood. The thick red liquid was already running freely down his face. He felt numb, the massive shock of feeling every death aboard the shield becoming a hit too many. He gurgled a strangled cry, sensing that the Force was slipping through his fingertips. Anakin shuddered and used his last vestiges of power for one last command. His other ship maneuvered, moving to shield Coruscant's pride from any and all ground-based weaponry with its hull. Then both cruisers accelerated and headed straight at the planet. On the bridge, Anakin Skywalker crumbled on the floor in a puddle of his blood. Disclaimer: I do not own Gundam Seed or Star Wars. They belong to their respective copyright owners. This story is not created with commercial aim. I make no money from it. And this part was beated by Gatemaster on the Space Battles forums. Thank you very much for the great work. Phase 19 =RK Part 7 Republic Cruiser Chimera. First Assault Fleet Flagship. High orbit over Geonosis. What are you going to do now, Yularen must. The hammer blow had fallen and his fleet was intact. Now the SEP's commander had a couple of choices to make. To either fall back to the defensive line, which had its problems, or attack. Either was viable tactics in this case. As far as the enemy knew anyway. If the Confeds decided to play defense, that was all right with the Admiral. It would make his job simpler, not to mention easier. So what was the worst thing that the enemy could do? Yularen would have jumped deeper in the system and waited, ready to pounce when the opposing force committed to attack the planet, sandwiching them between the orbital defense and the mobile forces supporting them, and the rest of the fleet. If the enemy declined to hit the planet, he could play for time, waiting for reinforcements and commencing long-range duels before making tactical retreat. That would work for a Republic force, with a battle line centered around Venotas, which were quite tough and fast. For the Cis that option wasn't as desirable. Their fastest ships, the Munificents, which made up the bulk of their fleet, were glass cannons. Heavily armed and fast, but suffered in the armor department. Their battleships on the other hand were behemoths, with the weapons and armor to take on multiple Venotas, but quite slow in real space. Simply, the Cis units which were tailor-made for hit-and-run attacks were too fragile if sent unsupported, and if kept in formation with the heavy hitters, well then he wouldn't have much trouble in engaging them heavily before their hyperdrives recycled and new jump coordinates were calculated. When all was said and done, he was confident to get the better of such confrontation. Which really left option 2, attack, as the option he had to prepare for. Get us in fleet formation Kilo. Lighter elements are to independently maneuver and clear the cruiser's firing lanes. What's the status on our fighter squadrons? How long until they are able to re-establish a proper screen? We are working on it. It looks like nearly 50% casualties. We haven't been able to re-establish contact with anyone more senior than a squadron leader. I see. Do what you can. Guardian status? Green across the board, all missile magazines are being reloaded as we speak. Good. Carry on. That was unpleasant. I stated the obvious. Thanks to my formal training from Ashara, I was able to distance myself from the deaths of the people I influenced with my battle meditation. Still, it was rather nasty sensation, feeling an echo of their deaths. Even if the dark part of my heart rather enjoyed it. That said, so far it was far better than the last time I used this discipline. It was during a major battle in the Great War, one that made this one look like a sideshow. While we won, the strain put me out of commission for weeks. Needless to say, I hoped to do better here. Which wasn't unreasonable. Not only was the scale much smaller, but there were very few organics on the other side to influence. The short lull in the battle helped too, giving me some precious time to center myself and use the light side to soothe the strain. As far as I could tell, Yularen had everything well in hand, so I declined from interfering. My assistance notwithstanding, I wanted him and his command staff to be the ones running and winning this battle. Doing so would have a lot of effects. They needed to know that I trusted them to do so, something most Jedi didn't if what I've seen from this war was anything to go by. Further, it would show the Republic that they didn't need the space monks in charge in order to win a major victory. That me, a Sith, assisted while there were no other Jedi present was of course a pure accident, one that I would capitalize on later. But most importantly, it would show the troops that I trusted them to get the job done. The Force stirred. I could feel Anakin going out like a shattered light bulb, but I could still faintly feel his presence even after his battle meditation abruptly cut off. So he was still alive. Which was good. I would be there to pick up the pieces if he survived the battle, and considering how big a hole he had dug for himself, I would own his ass. Now it was time to get back to work. I submerged myself deeper in the Force and concentrated on the web I've woven around every being in my fleet. My heart sped up as I soothed the emotions of my soldiers and breathed confidence in their hearts. At that moment we were a single entity ready to shatter anything that dared to stand in our way. =RK=. Droid Command Ship Nemesis. Third Wing Flagship. High orbit over Geonosis. Admiral Ningo strapped into his custom-made chair, activated the holographic interface that allowed him easier command over the fleet and checked his forces' positions. 65% of the fleet had reached the staging points and was more or less formed up. Fleet status? All ships are in the net. Jump coordinates calculated and locked in. Send targeting priorities. I want the leading munificent task forces to concentrate on enemy escorts. Following waves and the battleships are to engage the Vinotas. Ignore the Corellian cruisers. It will take too long to crack their defenses. Time and ships better spent on killing their lesser brethren. The behemoths could wait for now. Sent. The transparent displays hovering in front of the Admiral's face lit up with acknowledgements, and soon everyone in his command knew their task. It was time to go. All units. Execute. He ordered, braced for acceleration. For a split moment the world froze as hundreds of ships stretched in impossible lines. Faster than a biological mind should be able to perceive, they disappeared from the universe only to reappear in optimal range of the Republic fleet. For few seconds the fleet maneuvered, taking better positions and refining targeting solutions. A heartbeat later they opened fire. =RK=. Republic Cruiser Chimera. First Assault Fleet Flagship. High orbit over Geonosis. Multiple enemy contacts. The sensor operator stated calmly. We are under attack. By all means, return fire. Yularen ordered. Most of his ships had already shifted formations in an anticipation of possible attack. Despite that, it was going to be ugly. The Cis forces had jumped in perfect position to maximize the munificent's long-range firepower. I want Coronet and Freedom's battle groups to maneuver independently and engage Rogue One and 2 respectively. Invincible is to lead 2/3 of its heavy elements against Rogue 2, while the rest of the battle group is to keep station. They will be our mobile reserve and will keep an eye for the rest of the enemy fleet. Yularen pointed at the enemy units converging at the defense line in low orbit over Geonosis. The Admiral glanced at his aide. Felix, what's the status of Overlord? The primary objectives are secure. Overlord will be active in a couple of minutes. Let's hope it'll work. Otherwise this will be much uglier. =RK=. DCS Death Dealer. High orbit over Geonosis. How much time do you need? Boss shouted. He and Delta were camping near the main entrance to the computer core, while the Oni team was busy working their magic. Thanks to the new arms and armor, so far the casualties were surprisingly low. But that wasn't going to last. Whoever was in charge of shipboard security had gotten smarter. Now the B-1 droids were acting as shields for the SB droids, which in turn had the firepower to be a threat. Sir, Echo Squad reported sighting commando droids. We lost contact with them. Of course. It's never easy, is it? Sev muttered. We are in the network. The package will be uploaded in 60 seconds. Then we need to keep this mainframe operational until it propagates. Give or take, 5 more minutes. Joy. Pull Alpha and Beta squads back. It will be up to Kilo Company to keep the route out clear. Boss ordered. His ears perked up. There were more droidicas coming. How many iron grenades do we have left? I'm out. Sev muttered. I've got 4. Scorch patted his harness. 1. Fixer added. I'm out too. Now this is what we are going to do. RK equals. Light Cruiser Corellian Fury. Task Force Lacoon Flagship. First Assault Fleet. High orbit over Geonosis. This is going to be ugly. Rah. Graw. Nah. This is worse than Nashada. Keep the carriers between our main battle groups. All escorts except Cruiser Squadron 1 and Destroyer Divisions 3 and 7 are to advance. We are supporting Coronet's battle group. Guardian status? Green. All remaining weapon platforms are in the net, though they are down to the laser cannons. Keep them prioritized on enemy fighters. Once those munificents are in range, start targeting weapon emplacements. Wilco. Get us to the left flank. Let's cover that Venator division. RK equals. Corellian Cruiser Freedom. First Assault Fleet. High orbit over Geonosis. Commodore Joanna Holt of the Corellian Defense Forces glared at the holotank showing the enemy disposition. The whole of Rogue 2 had executed a precise tactical jump and now were busy shooting up her battle group. Something she wasn't going to let stand. All units, return fire. Concentrate on the munificents. We can kill them faster. And inform our escorts. We are going in. Helm, take us straight down their throats. I want us to get the attention of as much of the enemy battle line as possible. The Freedom has been built for this kind of fight. Let's give the lady her chance to shine. Mom, Invincible and most of her battle group are moving to reinforce us. Good. Let's show those tin cans how we do things on Corellia. When the fleet battle started in earnest, the Confederation forces appeared to have the upper hand. Their deft maneuvering placed them in position where they could concentrate most of their firepower on their targets, while the major part of the Republic forces in range could engage with about half of their weapons. Destroyers and light cruisers felt the brunt of the enemy assault, shattering one after another under the concentrated fire of munificent frigates. The Republic forces spat back its defiance with turbo laser bolts, heavy concussion missiles and waves of proton torpedoes. It was the Confederacy's turn to feel the sting. Munificents were torn apart by destroyer and frigate packs, while others died under the barrage of light cruiser squadrons. The fleet's formations unfolded like the petals of a giant flower, clearing firing lanes and movement vectors for the capital ships. With each passing moment more and more firepower was brought to bear. The Republic battle line came into range. Targeting priorities shifted, giving much-needed respite to the escorts. The first ordnance salvos struck their targets, overwhelming shields and blasting armor. The munificents started dying faster. Invictus is taking heavy fire. Opportunist just lost forward shields. Scratch another frigate. Shift starboard batteries on Sector 7-1. Keep all forward guns to that battleship. The Septembers are sending their remaining fighters. Finally. Relay it to the flag. Once they are a broken force, call in the hammer. Waves of vultures came screaming from behind the lines of Rogue 1 and 2. They were the majority of the Confederacy's remaining fighters in the system. Nearly 40,000 artificial mines, piloting craft sent on their final mission. Less than 8,000 torrents raced to meet them, backed up by 700-odd weapon platforms. And the Guardian systems of the fleet, which had already selected targets and ripple-salvoed their missiles. Fearless just went up. No survivors. Mom, signal from the flag. Overlord is commencing now. Commodore Holt grinned. All units, general advance. Get those eyesores out of my space. RK equals. Droid Command Ship Nemesis. Third Wing Flagship. High orbit over Geonosis. Admiral Ningo watched the slaughter with dispassionate eyes. The CIS commander knew that he had the advantage for the time being, yet he couldn't help it but feel dread. As if the outcome of the battle was preordained and no matter what he did, he was going to lose. The way the enemy was acting didn't help that grim premonition. They were reacting fast. Too fast. As if all of them knew what was happening, what his forces were doing the moment they started moving. There was no uncertainty, not even the tiniest hesitation amidst the Republic ranks. They were acting with a machine-like precision that was unnerving. The Admiral glanced at the clunky droids surrounding him. Actually, the Republic forces were even better than machines, if that was anything to go by. At least for the moment the assault was going relatively well. The attack was claiming a frightful harvest upon the enemy light elements, but they had reacted too fast. What should have been the slaughter of at least half their escorts for little loss, was turning out to be a slugging match. Then the Venata started joining the battle en masse, and his fleet's targeting patterns shifted, concentrating on the capital ships. Once the two sides were almost full engaged, it was time. He was unlikely to have a better chance to use his remaining fighter strength, almost 2/3 of which was committed to this attack. The rest were simply too far away to make it on time, so they were now bound to defend the planet. Send in the vultures. Shift fire to the enemy escorts and punch them an opening. Roger, Roger. Ningo shuddered. All he wanted was to get this battle done with and get away. A wave of almost 40,000 fighters weaved through his lines, seeking to gut the enemy fleet. The sensor display refreshed to clear the image, showing the vultures as pale blue wave that was expanding through his formations. The Admiral frowned. There were dots falling behind without obvious reason. Almost all of them were lit green, showing no sustained damage. Give me status on those ships, he growled. RK equals. First Assault Fleet Order of Battle. Capital ships. 3 Corellian cruisers, Invincible, Coronet, Freedom. 105 Venator-class cruisers / 120 V-19 Torrent, 36 Y-wing bombers each / escorts. 250 light cruisers / 78 Carrack, 172 Arquitens / 297 frigates / 87 Consular, 210 CR-90 / 32 PLC escort carriers / 150 V-19 Torrens, 100 Y-wing bombers each / 10 light freighters / 100 weapon platforms each / 17,400 V-19 Torrents, 6,980 Y-wing bombers. Cis Defense Fleet. 12 droid command ships / 1,500 vultures each / 47 battleships / 1,200 vultures each / 371 munificent frigates / 400 vultures each / 59 munificent frigates without fighter complement. Geonosis Orbital Defense Net. 16 Golan defense stations / 100 vultures each / 1,000 defense platforms / light turbo lasers and proton torpedo complements / 224 300 vulture droids. Losers prior to main fleet engagement. Republic, 11 Venatas, 8 Carrack, 6 Arquitens, 7 Consular, 12 CR-90, 8,900 Torrents, 399 bombers, 16 PLC escort carriers and 10 light freighters. Confederation, 2 DCS, 3 battleships, 49 munificent frigates, 131 vulture fighters, 1 Golan station, 43 weapon platforms,